a sunny day. I also hope you had a good bank holiday weekend. We're delighted to be joined by a fantastic cast of speakers at today's happy hour. We're going to start with Una Goldsworthy, who's the Chief Executive Officer at Brunel Care. On a personal note, can I also take this opportunity to thank Una and her team for hosting the HousingLIN in Bristol. We are really pleased to make use of your offices and facilities, but also to participate and share conversations and work and personal and social with your team. It's been a great relationship, and long may that continue. We're then going to be joined I've got here by David, but I think it may be Gary who follows next, from LIN Cymru, a sponsor of our Welsh LIN in particular, but Gary's also worked across England, southwest and southeast England, and probably other places as well that I don't know, but doing a lot of innovative work around care and support within the Welsh context, and actually an active member of our Welsh steering group that meets later this week. We're then joined by David Southgate, a policy manager at Age UK England. Lovely to have you with us, David, and to share some of the research and findings from your recent report around the cost of living crisis and the impact on older people. And that will link in really nicely with Craig White. Craig, who's the Chief Executive of Agile Homes, a company I've got to know more recently over the last month or so, and really interesting about the innovations that you're doing in this space in terms of both housing for older and supported housing for people with a disability, but also wanting to, I think, disrupt some of the market in terms of the way we think about sustainable housing and making it more energy efficient and affordable for people of all ages. And last but not least, a recent sponsor of the LIN Charity Bank, Jeremy, really delighted to have you back. And you're going to think about what's being said today and offer some contribution about where the charity bank has come from, and also respond to the debate that we're having in this happy hour. So without further ado, a very warm welcome to Una. So Una, over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. And yeah, we do have some great conversations with your guys in the office. It's been a great partnership. So I am not going to give you any research data or sort of policy background. I'm going to talk from a very personal organisational perspective. Brunel Care is an aged care charity and housing association. We work in the west of England. We've been going for over 82 years now, so we're older than the NHS. And we provide everything you might expect in terms of services for older people. So we have independent living, we have retirement homes, we have extra care housing, we have care homes, reablement centres, step-down hospital, home care, and so on. So the whole sort of continuity and pathway of older people's care. And I'm going to start, I think, by saying that I really do not have the answer. I think what we're experiencing in terms of the cost of living crisis, and it's a bit glib now, isn't it? We all say cost of living crisis, cost of living about everything. It's almost like a noun now about everything. Then, but it's much deeper than that, isn't it? And I think the impact on people who were previously wouldn't have suffered, who could quite easily do one job or maybe have two jobs in the family, now having to do two jobs and more, and still struggling and still really struggling. And any of us going to the supermarket and coming out with a bill, you know, you can just see massive changes. So it's a much wider and a much broader issue than just people that we might normally expect to have housed and cared for. I think Brunel Care as an organisation was perhaps one of the earlier, I don't know if I could say victims, one of the earlier, it was certainly one of the earlier experiences. We buy energy on behalf of all our customers, and we do that through an energy broker, and we do that once a year, and it's gone like clockwork every single year, and we always get a really good deal, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we didn't, of course, as you all know from what was in the press all last year. And we faced an absolute existential crisis last summer when our energy bill on behalf of our residents increased by 400%. So it went from 1.5 million to 7.5 million. So any organisation facing that sort of increase would have very, very difficult moments, and it was a real existential crisis. What that meant for our residents was that we pass on those costs to our residents, and for them it was, you know, people would say to me, what am I meant to do? And I had to say, I just don't know, I don't know. Now, fortunately, the energy discount that came in and some of the subsidy that we're able to get has really helped but still people have been really impacted, you know, by that, and still are. And actually we've gone back to the period of not having a discount anymore. So we had a very early take, if you like, of it not being an external thing, but something which was very internal to us as an organisation. What that did is made us perhaps act a bit quicker in how we had to respond. So one of the first things we did was set up a business continuity plan. It sounds terribly jargonistic, but actually what that did is it made us sit down and think, right, what are we going to do? What's our action? Who's going to do what? How do we coordinate all of this? So we had a communication plan. We had how to relate to customers, what impact it would have on customers, what impact it would have on staff and colleagues. We have over 1,200 colleagues working alongside me. So we had a whole plan around what we might do. Obviously, I sort of said at the beginning, there were some levers we just couldn't pull. I'll just mention a few of them. So one of the things we did was campaign. So right from August, we got into campaign mode, and we campaigned with our partners in the National Housing Federation and National Care Forum. And actually we did hit the headlines. We really did. We got an awful lot of coverage about that. And I think that helped in combination with others, obviously, for the government to bring in a subsidy provision for our residents that wasn't on the table before. Otherwise, they just wouldn't have had any benefit from that. So that worked, and it's actually continued to work, and we're continuing to get some of that benefit from it. The second thing we did is be really open with our residents. So we started quarterly meetings at all our sites. We had Zoom meetings like this, just telling people what was going on, because people ultimately were blaming us. So even though we're not an energy supplier, we were getting the blame. Why are you putting our bills up? You know, what it must be you. Nobody else has got this problem. So we started a proper campaign around communication, which we're still continuing actually, and we're still doing to this day. Another thing we did was look at our wage bill. So how do you stop poverty? People get paid more. It's basic, isn't it? So we really looked as an organisation about what we could do about our wages. We are commissioned, as many of you on the call will be, by local authorities and the NHS for most of our care services, and our rents are what pay for everything else. So we had very limited room to go anywhere. We had the year before committed to becoming a living wage employer. So we had managed to be to offer the real living wage for all our colleagues. But we knew this wasn't, with 10% increase in the real living wage, this wasn't going to be enough. So what we decided to do this year is, rather than have a percentage increase across the board for everybody, we did it on the basis of a lump sum. So wherever you were in the organisation, say from chief exec all the way, I'm going to say up to the carers, we got exactly the same rate. And that meant that for our carers, they were able to benefit from in excess of 10%, I think it was about 10.5%, which took them above the real living wage. And for everybody else, it graduated up from that. So obviously for the senior directors, it was a much smaller percentage, but it felt fairer and it felt more equitable for all of us, and we all sat behind that. We also reviewed all our terms and conditions, and actually we reduced our terms and conditions. I don't quite know why we had them, but we did, for some of our senior staff. So things like BUPA and other health things we've just got rid of, so that we can say that we've got an equitable playing field for everybody. And perhaps most importantly, we kept our differentials. So we made sure that if you didn't have like everybody at the same rate, you had an ability to move through. And then we also set up a financial hardship fund. We called it financial assistance rather than hardship. And we've been making payments to residents ever since, every week. And to be honest, most weeks it breaks my heart, because we're paying out for people's food. We're basically the funder of last resort. If people can't get funding from councils and others, then we're there to step in. The things we're having to pay for just shouldn't be possible, should it? How am I doing for time, Jeremy? Okay. Just as well, in terms of energy uses, we had a campaign around reducing energy use, because that's what was paid, that's what's huge bills. So, and we've achieved that. So we've managed to knock 10% off everybody's fuel bills, which has been really successful. The other thing we've done is around looking at not just our own organisation, but what can we do in our sense of place. So we're a place-based organisation. We work very much within our communities. Sorry, plane going over. And we worked with our local authorities, and in particular in Bristol City Council, around setting up warm spaces over the winter. And it's now called Welcome Spaces. And we offered all our extra care schemes and other sheltered housing schemes as well as places where people could come over the winter months. And that offered actually a way of engaging with the community, to getting people in who might not have otherwise come in. So actually had a lot of different benefits, and it's been so successful in Bristol that it's been copied across the country, and also is now carrying on over the summer. So it's not just linked to being warm, but also linked to community connections, and other objectives as well. Next point is around, we engage with the city around, again, a place-based campaign around becoming a financially resilient city. I think it's the first in the UK. We were sponsored by Hargreaves Lansdown, and it's a 5-point plan which they're leading, which is looking at pilot in Bristol about how the city citizens can become more financially resilient. And we're part of a cohort and a whole range of employers who are looking at what we can do as employers to offer better terms and conditions to our staff. And it's lots of different initiatives within that, whether it's training, counselling, pensions. That's a big one. How can we offer the real living pension? Because most care providers have pretty minimal pension terms, ours included. And actually financial resilience isn't just about the money in your pocket this month, it's also about planning for the future and saving for the future. So we're really interested in that, and if anyone wants to know more, let me know. But and there is a big but, I don't think we have cracked it. We're doing lots of different things on different levels, but ultimately what we need is better funding and better support and a more resilient sector. We went into this year's fee uplifts conversations with our local authorities and NHS, pretty much expecting that we wouldn't get inflation, we wouldn't get the 10%. But what we actually got was so disappointing that it was off the scale. And in some local authorities, we didn't even get, well, we got 0%, we got nothing at all. And against a backdrop where you've got real living wage going up by 10%, you've got all those other food inflation pressures, that is just astounding. And the answer we get from most of our commissioners is, well, we haven't got any money either. But there's something there, isn't there, about how, across social care, we have that accountability that we are not going to be able to be financially resilient and ensure that our staff and our colleagues are financially resilient without that wider perspective about where the funding for social care and for housing comes from. Thank you.
Una, that was absolutely great, and both sort of highlighting the challenges that you as an organisation have had to deal with, but also some of the ways strategically working with partners, you're trying to sort of look at that broader resilience to the benefit to residents and the broader citizen base in your situation, mainly around Bristol and the southwest area. So thanks very much, and I'm sure some of the points that you've highlighted will be echoed by others and either through the participants. So if you do have a question for Una or the wider team, please do put those in the Q&A box. As I said in my sort of introduction, I'm going to sort of just jump around a bit in the order of play. And Gary, I was just wondering whether you could follow next, and just from another operator perspective. As I said, Gary is the Director of Care and Support at Lincoln Cymru, and an active member of our Welsh steering group, and it's lovely to see so many of you on the board, on the delegate and participant list behind the scenes. So Gary, they're going to be waiting to hear what you have to say, and we'll give you probably feedback personally on Thursday as well, but no pressure, mate. No pressure.
Okay, that's fine. I'm used to no pressure from you, Jeremy. That's absolutely fine. I'm going to share my screen because I have done a few slides. So and I think the story I'm going to tell is going to be a very similar one, I think, to the one you've heard from Una. Right, someone might need to help me now in terms of how I get the slide. Is that showing full screen with you or not?
Yeah, I can see.
Yes,
oh, okay, fine. It's all right. It's just how it's set up on mine. Okay. So just to say briefly a little bit about Link Cymru Housing, we are we have an interesting balance of stock portfolio. So we have 3 nursing homes, we have 11 extra care schemes. I was the former CEO of Abbeyfield Wales, so we merged into Link in March last year. So we got 15 Abbeyfield houses across Wales, as well as probably around 3,500 to 4,000 general needs properties and smaller supported housing projects where we work with partners. Just contextually, our position is a little bit different to that of Brunel Care, because we're within the extra care schemes. We're not the care provider. That's actually commissioned separately, and at the moment we don't provide care in any of our existing schemes. So what do we know about the cost of living crisis? Well, from our point of view, I think we were probably hot on the heels of Brunel Care in terms of the impact of retendering energy costs. So we retendered over last summer and entered into a new contract in October. And perhaps unsurprisingly, it was our extra care housing, our nursing homes, Abbeyfield houses, sheltered housing, and some of our other larger sites with heated communal space, and those where we had a heat network. We've got a number of sites where we work in partnership with Switch2, where we have a combined heat and power network. And I think the other thing we noticed kind of fairly quickly was that whilst it might have had the biggest impact on these sites and on these services, the reality of the position was that it impacted on all of our tenants. And what we saw very quickly was more of our tenants falling into poverty, regardless of the housing setting that they were in. And a little bit like Brunel Care, we recognised the seriousness of the position, the challenges that were presenting themselves, and we knew we had to do something about this. And we were meeting as a business leadership group, so that's all the heads of services and the exec team were meeting weekly to explore ways in which we could begin to address and tackle the problem. So again, similarly to Brunel Care, just to put things into context, so our electric costs increased by 400%. Gas was around 600%. In terms of the increases on energy costs, we were seeing anything from £20 a week up to £75 a week, depending on the setting. And I should add that these increases were the increases in the communal costs of energy only. So our tenants were still paying on top of this their own energy bills for the energy that they consumed within their flat. So in some respects, this was almost kind of tip of the iceberg stuff. It created a fairly significant hole in our organisational budget for the last financial year. That's had a knock-on into this year because we won't be retendering until about end of July. And so we've had to think quite hard about the impact that this increase in energy costs has had on the other programs around the things we do. And we had to take the really difficult decision of choosing to vary our service charges in January 23. So across those, it was 23 services that were most impacted by the increase in utility costs. Our board took the decision that we were really left with no choice but to vary those service charges, and we did that with effect from January, and the challenges around that were compounded as well by the introduction of the Renting Homes Act in Wales, which watch this space because that's probably coming to England and a landlord near you soon. So I think there was some real challenges for us around trying to deliver this. So we tried to focus on ways in which we could mitigate the increase in the cost of these services to tenants. And we looked at this at various levels. So within our own management structure, we looked at whether or not there was really any scope for rationalisation. And we found some small areas where we were able to do a bit of work around this. We had a serious review and a rethink around the provision of meals, because the two kind of key areas that were impacting most on service charge increases were energy, were the provision of the meal service and the catering service within Extra Care, which we do retain in-house and within the Abbeyfield sites as well. We were like, well, okay, well, can we and do we continue to do this? And actually, after looking at the service, we took the view that the provision of meals was fundamental to the provision of extra care housing and the model within it, and certainly the same within Abbeyfield. So we had to kind of keep that going, and because we felt there was no choice. I think we also considered that given the challenges around income, if we weren't providing in our extra care, it's 1 meal a day, in Abbeyfield it's 2. If we weren't providing those meals, it might well be that some of our tenants wouldn't eat. So at least we were getting or providing a service where hopefully our tenants were still able to at least get 1 hot meal a day. And we took the opportunity to kind of look at the impact this would have on our ability to fill vacancies, because of the fairly sharp increase in cost. What impact did this have on our ability to kind of relet properties when they became available? And that's still work in progress in terms of looking at the impact it's had on our voids. We've certainly seen an increase across all of our services during certainly January to March, but that now seems to be tailoring off. So we're seeing a reduction in that. We also looked at whether or not we could deliver any savings within our services. And one area where we were able to look quite hard at making energy savings was through our BMS systems, so the building management systems. Within our extra care schemes, they're inevitably fairly complex systems, but a lot of the heating and energy use is controlled via something very similar to an iPad. So you can program that. And we worked with a consultant to be able to try and look at how we can improve the management of that, work with our tenants in terms of controlling heat and level of heat, and actually being responsive to local conditions. So working with our service managers to be able to use the systems properly, so when you get a day like today when the sun's shining brightly, you can actually turn the heating down and increase it when you get a colder snap. We also looked at service contracts, but we didn't really make any real savings there, because we were, you've got statutory and regulatory responsibilities to service kit, so you've got to keep doing that. And even within facility contracts and looking at what else we can do within the service charges by reducing frequency at which we do things, we didn't feel there was an awful lot of savings to be had in there in the short term. And I suppose that was the critical issue, that actually in the short term, the savings that you could make were fairly limited. What we then looked at was really, if the amount of material savings in services was fairly limited, what else did we need to do? So a bit like Una, we were trying to wrap around support for our tenants and the way we do this. So we worked with our comms team to make sure that in terms of financial help with energy costs, there were clear links and signposting into our website about where people could get advice on getting support for energy. We had our staff trained around that as well, so they were clear about what it is that they could do. And we have a benefits advice and income recovery team, and they worked with our service managers and trained up our service managers and service coordinators to help advise tenants into broader benefits, so particularly things like attendance allowance and so on, to really make sure we were maximising income for tenants where we were, because we were quite surprised about the relatively low level of other benefit take up outside of housing benefit. And I think the other thing we did was try and do an education piece around the energy cap, because there was lots of conversations going on on the TV at the time around, you will not pay more than £2.5 grand a year for your energy. Well, actually, that simply wasn't true. So, you know, to try and kind of put that right in terms of people understanding what the energy cap was about. We also redirected resources, so we moved staff around to be able to, where we actually canvassed staff to be able to seek people with the right experience and expertise, so that we could temporarily redirect them into supporting advice and information to our tenants to make sure that they got what they need. And you know, we found ourselves introducing food banks. Una mentioned some of their services and some of the support to things like nursing homes and residential care homes. Well, we introduced food banks into our nursing homes and into some of our other sites and our head office, so people were able to get a range of support, and we got quite a lot of that funded. You know, our community engagement and community investment team did frankly an excellent job of accessing grant funding to set up some of these food banks within our schemes. As I mentioned, then it was really around thinking about what do we do with our assets. So I mentioned already the targeting and advice and maximising the use of BMS systems. We looked very hard at our investment program, so our planned maintenance program, and retargeted that to things that might reduce energy consumption. So putting in like PIR lighting systems in some of our older extra care schemes, because some of those are 20 years old now. And also using a funding stream called ORP, which is Optimised Retrofit Programme in Wales, to be able to install PVs, battery storage, and we've got an investment programme targeted at utilising ORP to really reduce energy across all of our stock, not just our extra care schemes. So just to end really, so just to pick up kind of where we are now, I suppose. I mean, we implemented our service charge review without really knowing how much we might recover, and at the time we knew from our tenant profiling that across our 23 most expensive sites, tenant entitlement to housing benefit varied from 30 to 83% depending on the scheme. Those increases were introduced in January 23, and we have been fortunate so far that the vast majority of those local authorities have paid. Interestingly, just picking up the impact it's had on arrears. So our overall gross arrears have gone up by around 2% or 2 percentage points. But we're looking now, because there's always a delay in payments, that is starting to level out, and we will hope over the next couple of months that will start to come down. And we have seen an increase in both void relet times and void levels and refusals due to affordability. I think it's also worth noting that regardless of the impact on this, we've got quite a high level of self-funders, and they've had to fund the total cost of the increases. We're now at the point where we're looking to retender our energy contracts, and we're hoping now, and looking at the market, we're seeing reductions, but we're not expecting those to come down to 2022 levels. We have undertaken and committed to reducing our service charges mid-year again if we are able to get a good reduction in our energy costs as a result of retendering. And the one thing we are looking at is using, so those of you that are familiar with service charges will know that there is an admin fee in there of, depending on what you charge, anywhere between probably 10 and 15%. So obviously that has been applied to the increase in energy costs. So we are currently looking at whether we're able to top slice that and use that to support a hardship fund for our tenants to continue to support them through the energy crisis. I'll briefly mention heat networks again, because they have been incredibly problematic because of the regulation around how you manage heat networks. And that is still an ongoing issue for us that we're, I would say, 70–80% of the way through resolving, and resources have, you know, continued to focus on income maximization and debt management. I would just pick up one final thing that Una alluded to, and that is really the bit around commissioners and the bit around the impact it's had on fees. So certainly registered care providers in Wales have been lobbying heavily commissioners for fee increases in the current year, because almost without exception, we only work across 2 local authority areas in terms of registered care. There was no mid-year increase in fee rates to mitigate the costs, so we had to carry that. We had limited headroom to do too much within that year's budget. And interestingly, this year we have had one local authority offer us a 14% increase in fees, and the other has said nothing. We're getting nothing. So that has a major impact on business, and is something that I suspect will be ongoing in terms of looking at our relationship with commissioners going forward. So the challenges are not over yet by any stretch of the imagination. And I'll stop there.
Gary, thanks ever so. And it was interesting because Una talked about financial resilience, and particularly around a citizen approach. What you've demonstrated is some of the financial challenges about being a resilient housing organisation and care organisation as well. I'm sure that will come through as you experience both inequalities that your residents and customers experience. But we're going to look a bit more at that inequalities. I'm really delighted that David's joining us. Two real important areas that have come through in the recent weeks or recent months are 2 reports. One from Age UK, and for those of you who followed my Jeremy talks last week will know that the CIH, and I think Sarah's joined us from CIH today, have also published a briefing around older people's issues and the cost of living crisis. But we're going to focus on the work Age UK have done, and no more than the author David. So David, over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy, and yeah, thank you, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen, if it will let me. Can everyone see that, or is it not doing it properly? You can.
You need to click from the beginning, from memory.
It's not letting me. There we go. Is that better?
Oh,
wait, swap it around.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well done.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Jeremy. It's great to be here to talk about this. So really interesting to hear the comments and thoughts already. Our perspective from this, so I work on our consumer policy team at Age UK. So I come at it mainly from the consumer perspective. But there's a lot of things I think which link up with what's already been said, really, and some of the issues we see both from the consumer perspective, but particularly around financial resilience, which I think links up with many of the benefits entitlement issues that Gary was referring to, and also the comms stuff that Una mentioned originally as well. So if I get a chance, I'll come round to that towards the end. But what I'm going to talk about here is our Keeping the Lights On report, which is a time series data set that Age UK are putting together to assess the impact of the cost of living crisis on people aged 60 plus in GB. The purpose of this first 2 waves that we've done here is to look at the need to address affordability, which we see as the underlying cause behind a lot of the cost of living issues due to energy, and also it will help with other things, so food costs and wider issues as well. I'm David Southgate, I'm a policy manager at Age UK, and my lead area is energy itself and more broadly cost of living as well. So firstly, what I wanted to do was give you the context from what we've got from our research. Just to quickly tell you these 2 waves here. So the light pink bar is for September 2022, and the dark pink is January 2023. Both surveys are representative of the older population aged 60 plus in GB. What this first graph is showing is really how older people have felt in emotional terms and sort of a well-being response to the cost of living. And you can see the question at the top there that we asked. And you can see that anxiety and concern for others are a really key component of what older people are worried about. And all the way at the other end, you can also see sleepless nights. So that's around 500,000, 600,000 older people who report having sleepless nights as a result of the cost of energy. You'll see also that it's coming down slightly. There's a variety of reasons for that I'd be happy to get into, but one of the big ones is between the first wave and the second wave, we had that guarantee of the triple lock coming in from April this year, which made a really big difference, alongside the feeding through of that energy bill support scheme support and also the energy price guarantee, which we did start to see make a really big difference. Next is in terms of the impacts on them. So this is what really is the impacts are having the most direct effect on these sort of four areas really. And the first of them's health. So you can see about half of older people are concerned that energy prices are going to impact their health, which is a really worrying statistic. Being able to heat their home and paying the household bills, a similar level there in terms of almost 2/3. And well over half who are worried about those two issues. And then also the broader cost issues. So affording other essentials, mainly food, big issues there of around a half, again, worrying about that particular issue. And just for context as well with that, the population you're looking at is about 12 million older people. So where it says about half, that's about 6 million older people in GB who are worrying about being able to afford their other essentials. What have they actually been doing? So the main one is cutting heat and power. So in September, it was about 40% or 2/5 of older people who are cutting the amount of heating and powering of their home. And this skyrocketed to more than half, so 54% from January as temperatures plummeted again. I'll leave that up there for a moment for you each to look at some of the other ones. But the one that stands out the most to us is if you look sort of towards the end of the graph, we asked how many of you have left home to keep warm, and about 5% of them had actually left home to seek shelter from public buildings, transport, warm banks and other areas to try and make sure that they could keep themselves warm. Again, that's about 600,000 older people that you're looking at there. So it's a significant number of older people. This is coming back partly to something that Gary mentioned, which is in response to it, older people are doing a lot of things also to try and boost their income. And the main one that they're trying to do is search for attendance allowance and search for pension credit. So you can see there on the far left, about 10%, an increase from 8% in September, 10% in January, had done a benefits check. And crucially, this question is phrased as recently. What have you done? And we see that as meaning in the last sort of 3 or 6 months, what have you done? Having 1.2 million older people conducting a benefits check in that short amount of time is really positive. It's good that they've done that, but you also have to bear in mind that it really represents how serious the scale of the issue is and how many people are out there trying to get that additional support, particularly the linked support you get through pension credit, so the warm home discount being the primary one there. We also looked at changing work habits and a broad range of other issues, and you saw about 4% of older people delaying retirement, extending working hours, and doing other things to try and make sure they could keep in work. As you might expect, more of them did it below state pension age. You're still looking at about 2% of them over state pension age who changed their work habits, so going back into the workforce. So again, really desperate coping strategies in many cases. And then lastly, I won't dwell on this one for too long, but this is what older people wanted to see in response. It's very, very rare to get almost universal support for a measure. You can see there that 90% of them said the triple lock needs to be maintained longer term, really strong support for it. And as I said, that actually went up even after the government said they'd bring it in from April, because there's still a concern it won't come back in future years. At the other end of the graph is social tariff, which I'm going to go on to now, and also energy efficiency, which I'm going to give a brief overview for. Discount, the social tariff itself, so the name suggests it might be just for social housing, but actually it's for all housing types. And it's designed to provide a 50% discount for everyone who's eligible, target those in greatest needs, both on and off the benefit system, automatically enroll eligible households, be universal across suppliers, sit alongside existing support, and support all eligible domestic consumers. Those are on fixed tariffs, alternative fuels, and more broadly. The reason for this set of principles, which we agree with and many others in the charity sector do, is because we wanted to provide deep support, but also provide support to those who are unable, for whatever reason, to access pension credit, housing benefit, or a long list of other benefits. And we've set the government a really high ambition to try and improve their data matching in order to deliver that targeted support to people who traditionally miss out. And we think that's really, really important, alongside that automatic enrolment component as well. In terms of who would be eligible, so first off, means tested benefit recipients, so universal credit, housing benefit, and pension credit, amongst others. But also disability benefits. So one of the reasons for this is many on attendance allowance, disability living allowance, and PIP have been dropped off of the eligibility criteria for the warm home discount, at least standalone eligibility criteria, and are still facing much higher costs as a result of their disability. So we think it's really important that those disability benefits are added. Also, carers allowance. We know carers face much higher costs, and it's much more difficult for them to earn higher incomes as a result of the caring responsibility. So carers allowance is a really key component. And then the last two there are basically linked to the data matching. So we want to see the government improve that data matching to extend it to everyone who is living in relative poverty. So if they're below that 2/3 of median household income. How much does it cost? Again, I won't dwell on this part too long, but it depends on the underlying price of energy. We think, realistically speaking, it will probably be around that central scenario. So you're looking at about £9.4 billion. It covers around 10 million of the most vulnerable households across GB, and also Northern Ireland. We factored in Northern Ireland as well there, but it does depend on the underlying price. So you can see if the underlying price of energy, or the price cap, is around £1,750, then you get that £9.4 billion cost. And if the prices are slightly higher or slightly lower under those scenarios, it will cost slightly more or less. The reason for this is that we think it's really important to have a unit rate social tariff. So people's discount is proportional to how much energy they use, and also to eliminate the standing charge, because those two components are not already addressed by existing support. And we know are two really fundamental problems that older people and those of all ages face. We're also keen to make sure the government fund this directly. The reason for that is if they don't get the data matching right and they make it subsidized through consumer bills, then people who are missing out on the social tariff will have to pay for it through their bills, which we think is unacceptable at this stage. Very, very quickly, have I got time, Jeremy, for the last two? Yeah, brilliant. So last two slides are, how does the social tariff link up with energy efficiency? So we believe that a social tariff and energy efficiency are the two long-term solutions to addressing affordability in the energy market. I've discussed the social tariff, but the energy efficiency component really is that more sustainable long-term ask that we're pushing for. And the reason for that is partly down to this graph. So you can see, and I know there are issues with EPCs, we're aware that there are problems with them, but we're using this as sort of a template for the issue, really. But you can see that on the far left, that's EPC, that's Energy Performance Certificate, band A to C, the most energy efficient households, and these are domestic dwellings. Their average typical bill in January 2023 was £2,100. At the other end of the scale, if you're in bands F to G, the lowest energy efficiency bands, your bill's closer to £5,000. And it comes back partly to what Gary said, which we have another problem with ourselves as well, which is there's been some misinformation put out there, partly through government sources and from elsewhere, about how the price cap works. And of course, it doesn't cap consumer bills, but that's what many consumers think it does. And actually, it leads to people in those lower EPC bands really struggling, because they sometimes, in some cases, think that their cap will hit at that £2,500, and then are hit with a real shock when their bill actually can be far higher than that, almost double. So it's a real information component to it as well. So what do we need to do about that? So we think the target of net zero is a good ambition, and we support it, but you have to make it a just transition. People have to be able to access it, and particularly those on the lowest incomes. There's two specific things that we think need to happen. The first is the government need to massively improve its funding for Eco Plus, the energy company obligation. Eco Plus is the sort of additional wing that's slightly more flexible and only focused on single measures, which means that ideally installers would be able to engage with the program much more easily. So we're asking for an extension of that scheme and better funding to make sure it can cover as many homes as possible. And secondly, a big group that we deal with quite consistently is people who are off the gas grid. So they're using oil, bottled gas, coal to heat their homes, and they're being told to try and make this transition to net zero, when it's really difficult for them oftentimes to afford expensive alternatives like biomass boilers or electric heat pumps. So we've said to the government, you need to up the funding here and provide £1 billion every year through to 2032. And the reason we've said that is that our estimates show that that's what's required to offer every single household who is eligible for HUG an opportunity to actually engage with the scheme. And that's so important to try and make sure that they can keep those bills down and ultimately make net zero actually something that we can realize and attain. And yeah, that's everything for me. So any questions or anything after the session, that's our policy team email address. So please do send them through. And there's a bit.ly link there for the report, but I'm sure we can send that around separately. Thanks very much.
David, thank you. Some real interesting facts and figures, as well as sort of, commentary on the situation. I see Sally has actually uploaded the link in the chat box, so there are that's now available to all to access. And I also think it follows nicely on to Craig as well, who's going to talk more from his perspective around that sort of retrofit, as well as the sort of decarbonisation and some of the real exciting things that they're doing, not just in Bristol but beyond as well. So Craig, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you everybody for being here today. I am assuming you can now see my screen. My name is Craig White. I'm CEO of Agile Homes, and I'm going to talk to you about what we're doing. We're dealing with a cost of living crisis from a very high level macro cost of housing all the way into pure poverty, and dealing with that. So. The housing crisis is now a decades-old problem, and we've also got the climate emergency, war in Europe, post-pandemic Brexit. There's no other time other than on a war footing where we might have to deal with more attrition in our world. We've responded to that. Well, we started before all of that happened, but our response, I think, works very well. So we have a new and disruptive development model. We unlock land that is free and hidden in plain sight, which can transform how you do housing. We're going to deal with the climate emergency and carbon capture. And one of the things we're expert at is finding finance in whatever shape, debt, equity, investment, grant, and other mechanisms to flow into projects. And we do that on behalf of the communities we serve. And our whole approach is to think small and scale fast, paraphrasing, small is beautiful, housing as if people mattered. That's a paraphrase of Schumacher. Along the way, we're going to reduce reoffending by providing skills, training, and education, and deliver something that we call properly affordable homes. Current definition of affordable home is 80% of the market, which you can be a Cambridge graduate and not be able to afford a house anywhere in any metropolitan centre in the UK. And our values we wear on our sleeves and hold very tightly internally: people and planet. So housing centered around people and needs led, and then profit and purpose, normally seen as either or, but we know it to be both and. Just some stats. There's lots of stats today, but there are just 11 volume house builders in the country who are currently delivering 50% of our housing supply, or controlling it, depending which end of the spectrum you look at. So in 2020, they built 96,000 homes and yet had planning approval for 460. So there's a kind of well-trodden myth around planning is getting in the way of delivering the homes we need. That next stat is the median salary for those top 11 house builders was 5.7, and that's the median, and one topped out at 22 million last year. Average house price in the UK is 288, so that's about 11 times average. And if you're in London, it's about 17 times your average household income. But we're not trying to compete with these house builders, nor in the conventional housing market. We're doing things very, very differently. And a date for your diary, we are repeating our successful housing conference, which we launched last year, called the Radical Housing Conference. There's an open invitation for people to diarize that, and then we'll send out some links. So here's the housing supply over the last 70 years. You can see there's a big mountain in the 50s and 60s, and that was driven primarily by social housing, council housing, with Mr. Barrett doing his thing as well. And then you can see the social housing kind of dribbles out in 1994, and we can thank Margaret Thatcher for that. And then the plan was commercial and housing associations were meant to start doing the heavy lifting, but the reality is we're only building half of the demand. And the recent stat I heard just this week was that we've got to build 600,000 homes a year to meet demand. I'm just going with 340,000. We're only building half of those, and that's created a vacuum in the housing market. And that's where we work, rather than trying to compete with these volume house builders who are perhaps growing fat, happy, and lazy on the turnover there and the margins they're able to deliver. And I hope there are no volume house builders on the call, but happily we'll take questions on whether I'm allowed to say those sorts of things. So what did we do? We developed a different way of building homes, and this is a project that we did in 2017. It's a triple glazed, super insulated, airtight, near passive house home built to comply with the Caravan Act. So if it were sitting on conventional foundations, it would be a mortgageable house. It's also mortgageable in the way we've configured it here, but it is movable. And that's really interesting because we didn't have to ask for planning approval. So we built it on land that was free and hidden in plain sight on a community centre in Bristol. We then invited our mayor in Bristol. We have an executive mayor, he writes checks, Marvin Rees, and he was voted in on the ticket to deliver more affordable homes, but like everybody was struggling to get his target numbers done. And we did it in just 10 weeks, and we call it TAM. It's one of what we do. And they come in extra small sizes. So we're working on the rough sleepers accommodation program, all the way up to what we call extra large, all of which are movable, which means we can get them down on the ground very fast. But they are absolutely not caravans, but they comply with the Caravan Act in terms of the law. So they're built to the Future Home Standards 2025 today. Today, post-pandemic, it takes 20 weeks to get these things down on the ground. They're built to the industry standard design life of 60 years. They are mortgageable, and because they qualify as recoverable capital, we can asset finance them. So what we're doing is just structuring a slightly different way of delivering homes. The key thing, TAM, is our top line there, but over the 400 homes we are building over the next 2 years, TAM forms about 10 to 15% of those homes. Those are the rapidly deployed, let's get going. And then the rest are family homes. So the top line is TAM. We call that a Trojan horse. It gets us doing stuff very, very fast. And then we can build out and deliver conventional housing to meet standard housing need. And give you a couple of case studies of how when you unlock land for free, you can transform what people are doing. So left-hand side is the We Can Make Homes project in Norwest. We co-founded that with the Norwest Media Centre and the community of Norwest. And effectively, it is an opt-in densification of a 1930s council estate. So opt-in is really important. The community are in the driving seat. And what we were able to reveal by doing lots of data mapping and data scraping was that of this 5,000 estate of semi-detached red brick homes, 56% of them are lived in by 1 or 2 people over the age of 55. So those are the empty nesters, a lot of whom are moving into getting older and getting frailer and wanted a downsize option, and there was none for them. The other 44% is mum, dad, son, daughter with a baby on the way and a boyfriend that wants to move in, both of whom are waged, and so not on housing benefits, but actually have no rental choices in Bristol. It's a hot housing market in Bristol. When we asked both of those cohorts what they wanted, they both said 1 and 2 bedroom homes. And there is none in the 5,000 houses in the estate of Knoll West. So we went spatial mapping and found room to build 3,500 homes in gaps, corners, no man's land, and very, very big back gardens. That's an unfeasible amount of houses to build. So the program is now up and running, and they're going to build 350 homes. The first 2 have gone onto site, and this is where the community are now driving the development of their own housing needs, so that we can make homes. Project is now a community interest company run by the community on behalf of their own housing needs. Top right-hand side is Emmaus homelessness charity in Bristol. This is right in the middle of Bristol, a place called Stokes Croft. And Jessica Hodges, the CEO of this charity, collects housing benefit on behalf of formerly homeless people who they call companions. And her strategy was to buy houses, but she had to go further and further and further out, where the houses she can afford to buy are now bus trips too expensive for the formerly homeless people to actually come into the city to do the purposeful work that they do with Emmaus. So we said, Jessica, you're sitting on a lot of land, you just have to look up. So we secure planning permission for 15 1 and 2 bedroom homes on the roof of their offices in Bristol. So both of those developments have no land cost in them. So suddenly you can start to take land cost out and start the journey to transformation on housing development. Retrofit, we're not just new build. This is Walsall in the Midlands, a community called Rycroft, again a 1930s council estate, who want to do community-led retrofit. And the government has spun up green deals of various flavors, all of which have fallen over in a variety of different and disappointing ways. And the problem with retrofit is you have to do it with people in residence. So that's very disruptive. It's safety is paramount, so you have to go slow. So the pounds spent per kilowatt hour and kilogram of CO2 saved is really not very, very successful. And that's why it doesn't work. So this is community-led opt-in retrofit. So what do? We build 4 3-bedroom TAMs, which are movable, if you remember that, and we put them in the community. And then we do decant, recant. So the Jones, the Smiths, the Whites, and the Greens decant out. We can then fast retrofit their home, and then they recant back in the home, and we step repeat around the estate. So this is a real project that will start later this year with the community of Rycroft in the driving seat. And in terms of energy outcomes at the end, it's a community grid that goes in, irrespective of tenure. It is a community grid working with a startup business in the UK called Our SNRG, Synergy, oursynergy.com, and they will fund the PVs, the batteries, the installation, and the management for free for that community energy grid, and guarantee 30% energy costs below market. Guarantee 30% of energy costs below market, all electric. And why would they do that? Well, it's a carbon trading offset scheme where big corporates are having to write very large checks to meet their carbon reduction obligations, and will benefit from that. Accessibility and inclusion is a big part of our work, and we're working with Guy Harris at Accessible PRS. So everything I show you is also designed. There is an equivalent twin, which is for wheelchair living, inclusion, and accessibility. Just wanted to put those 2 brochures up. We're working with Places for People on very profound need. This is an existing site in Bristol, and the reason we're called Agile, we're building homes on stilts. This is for a program that Places for People run, which is getting formerly homeless people off the street, and they're coming off the street with drug and alcohol addictions, so that very complex care and support needs, and some are coming off the street with amputation as a result of intravenous drug use. So these are all compact 24 square meter homes that comply with government standards for that compact type. All of them are for M43 wheelchair living. There's some stats I'll leave out to go. So what do? We don't just design, make and deliver. We actually do something called a solution stack. So our solution stack sounds very high tech, but it's based around people. So person, center, needs led. We then unlock land. We then put the necessary legal structures in place to have that land stewarded by a community land trust, a CIC, a CBS, a charity, a housing co-op. We then put in the investment model, whether that be debt, equity, investment, grant, and then we design the homes in a bespoke way for housing need, and then we work with partners to the management and maintenance. I'm not going to describe that diagram that's just appeared, but that's the level of detail we map to be able to get grant and everything else to flow into our projects. This is the Halton Senior Co-Housing Group. So there are co-housing groups acting collectively to build their own housing need. And this is for 14 homes in Halton. They had planning permission for conventional housing development, but the cost of living crisis, the cost of everything crisis has put it out of reach. So what we're doing is working with Lancaster City Council and Lancashire County Council to change the planning approval to a site license for caravans, but remember we don't do caravans. And what we're able to do is do an M43 wheelchair accessible living design as a co-housing project using 100% of our TAM solution. And we don't design caravan parks, we design places where people want to live. And here's a zoom in of some of the spaces and the courtyards we create. So I'm going to talk about carbon capture and storage very quickly. So the emissions to atmosphere is bad, capture is good. A typical house in the UK emits about 17 tons of CO2 just to get made, but it does have some carbon capture via the trees that are used to make the wood that go into our building. If we were in Scotland, 84% of all Scotland houses are timber framed, so less emissions to atmosphere, more carbon now stored. Let's have a look at what we do. We're about 5 tons now emitted to atmosphere. We use more timber. We insulate with natural materials, in this case straw, and we work with something called compressed straw board. So what we do is bank and store 27 tons of atmospheric CO2. And everybody's excited about this. It costs about 1,000 tons per euro to do air source carbon capture. That's all the Californian companies doing that. It's built into the retail price of our homes. Let's just put that into an everyday term. Does anybody on the call have a Tesla or an electric vehicle? I don't expect an answer, but there's Elon Musk in his Tesla. He is saving 273 kilograms of CO2 per annum, which is stunning for a car. But we've just done 27,000 kilograms locked up and stored in our homes. So put simply, it takes 99 years for Elon to catch us. We're doing carbon capture and storage in ludicrous mode. And here's the punch of all of this slightly esoteric description. The current trade price for carbon is 88 euros per ton. Let's say it's 100 euros per ton. That's what it was in February. So Q3 this year, we will do the world's first trade for carbon capture and storage into the built environment. It's a FTSE 100 telecom company in the UK. There's only 5 of them, so you could probably identify who it is. And they will pay for the storage of carbon in those homes, but not own it. So if it's 100 euros per ton, we can save £2,700 per home, and we can get affordable homes to be even more affordable. So we also design and manufacture our homes in a discounted way, providing skills training and education for prisoners who are about to leave prison. So in one of the lockdowns, we signed a contract with the Ministry of Justice to design, manufacture our build systems, some of our build systems in prison workshops. And that's been a huge success, and they've already delivered some projects. This is the first. This is for Torbay Council. This is land that is free and hidden in plain sight, owned by the council. Behind us is an office rented by the NHS, and this is a home for very young single mothers. And in this case, the first young mother to move into this house, call her Hannah. She had fled domestic abuse in Liverpool and had ended up in Torquay. The multi-agency wraparound support that Torbay then does allows her and baby, a 4-week-old baby, to kind of rebalance their life. And then she moves into conventional occupation of a home in Torquay. We're on to our 4th mother and baby on that program. When I say we're not, we don't do the agency piece, but we are now building 2 more homes on that same site. So we're expanding what we do in design, manufacturing, prison workshops to what's called outside the wire. I'm sitting on our facility here in Oxfordshire, a 4-acre site with 21,000 square foot. We call it the Centre for Low and Innovative Carbon Solutions, which spells CLICS for short. And we have just offered jobs to 6 prisoners who will be released on temporary license and start their pathway into employment by doing skills training and education here in Bristol. So what do we do to reduce the cost of living at a macro level and at the micro level? We never pay for land. You don't need to buy land to build homes. I'll tell you that secret later. We can reduce the cost of building homes by working with people in an unimpeachably social impact space by providing skills training and education. We're trading carbons, and we've even got that telco to accept that they're going to pay a premium for that ton of carbon stored because of the social value we are creating. So we're trading social value to further reduce the cost of our homes. We get finance to flow in new ways. We're not going to butt heads with the incumbent house builders. We do housing as if people mattered. I'll stop there. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you. Very inspiring presentation, and thanks for also highlighting the importance of thinking about this in relation to the cost of living crisis, not just in terms of the individual, but also the system as well. So that macro is important as well as thinking about the micro. So that's really important, and I'm sure we'll come back to that as well. Well, Jeremy, you've been waiting patiently, and I know you haven't got a PowerPoint slide, but you wanted to pick up on some of the things that you've heard and also give a charity bank for you as well. So thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. Over to you.
Thanks very much, everybody. Just to introduce myself very briefly, my name's Jeremy Ince. I'm a regional manager with Charity Bank. We're a social bank that makes loans to charities and community organisations, many of whom that we've kind of touched on today: Abbey Fields, care providers, Arms House Movement, Emmaus. These are all organisations that we support by, I suppose, by helping to fund the cost of the properties and the homes that are provided, many of which is supported housing for people with homeless, mental health issues, older people, disabled people that have fleeing domestic violence. So many of the many needy groups that have been talked about today. And one of the things that kind of saddens me today is the fact that there's it seems to be a reluctance to pay for all the care that some of these individuals need. We're still out there. We're still lending. It's much harder now because the economics of investing in new homes is challenging, and I guess I don't have to tell many people on the call about how difficult it is with uplifting costs, uplifting interest rates, but we're still doing our best to kind of I suppose square the circle in many ways, and help our existing, both new and existing borrowers with affordable loans, with flexible repayment terms, working with people that with organizations that may be finding things challenging, particularly from a cost perspective. what else have we been doing? We've been working around energy efficiency and helping many of our housing providers improve their energy rating of properties so that it helps people to live more affordably. So that's the kind of the stuff that's been that we've been doing. And it's been interesting listening to Craig talk about some of the very innovative housing that Agile Homes have been involved with. So I certainly want to pick up with you offline to talk about maybe how we can get involved in funding some of your caravans that are not caravans. Yeah, those are the sort of a few observations from me really, and I guess we'll probably hand back to Jeremy now, and we can open it up to the floor for some questions.
Oh, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for sort of giving an outline of the work of the charity bank, and we're delighted that you're on board with the LIN as well. So we've got a few minutes. I've deliberately let it overrun slightly because I think each of the presentations was really stimulating, and I can see from the chat box that everybody's has commented, and also I know one or two of you have been responding to the questions in the Q&A box. There are a couple that haven't been answered, and there's one from Kat from Guinness. For Una, who would be best to contact about welcome spaces and expanding warm hubs to run beyond winter? Thanks. So I don't know if you want to sort of either comment now or do that offline.
Yeah, I mean, there was a key contact within Bristol City Council, which if you let me know, I can put you in touch with.
Okay, and Janet, lovely to hear from you again. Janet, a long-time supporter of the LIN and through our London networks. Craig, you said you would tell us later how you never pay for land. Please share your ideas. Well, I know that's the golden nugget. So in a couple of seconds, are you able to do that? Do unmute yourself.
Yes, I can. There's legislation that makes this in England. It's slightly different than Wales and Scotland. So it's the Custom Build and Communities Housing Act 2015. What it obliges is all local authorities to create a register of land that can only be sold or distributed to custom build and community housing groups or third sector organizations. So that is the land supply, and it's not allowed to be sold to commercial builders, which is, so the biggest change in land supply in the UK happened in 2015. It's kind of went slightly unnoticed, but it's transformative. Then how do I get it for free? How do we get it for free? So we don't buy land, we won't acquire land, and we do not seek to own land by any. So we're not a speculator on land. So what we do is we then work with the local authority to demonstrate that it could be released into that space, but now we're going to advise on how it can be done for free. Local authorities don't like me saying that, so for social value is how we do it. So councils don't own land. While they often describe themselves as landowners, under the law they are landlords. They were gifted the land at incorporation whenever they were in corporation. So Bristol Corporation was incorporated and the state handed over their assets to be managed locally by councils or local authorities. So you have to ask the Secretary of State for permission to do that. The Secretary of State, she or he, I think it's a he at the moment, has 3 tests on how that land can be disposed of for less than best value, which is the public sector test. And those are, is the land contaminated? Well, that's a very obvious thing that we could all do. So the land's contaminated, we're not, we got to pay for the cost, so we're not going to pay for that. The land is vacant, which is an ancient medieval definition of land, status of land, which is slightly arcane and quite legal. And the third one, and I paraphrase, the Secretary of State can release land at less than best value if the social value of doing so is greater than the market test. And that's it. You are now signed under an NDA and cannot share that with any commercial house builders. That's the model.
Craig, thanks for that very quick overview, and I'm sure that when I meet with you and Guy tomorrow, we can describe if there's a way we can articulate some of this through the LIN and or in some way further forward. Look, I'm going to wrap it up shortly, but before I do so, there's one question which I think Gary's answered in the chat box or the Q&A box, but it links in issues around energy consumption and the impact on people's well-being, and particularly their ill health and hypothermia. And I was just wondering whether David or Gary or anybody else wants to just, if I start off with David and then Gary and work around for final comments, any response to that particular question?
Yeah, so it's a really important question. There's two things we've seen. So one of them is there's a lot of concerns around people who are using in-home medical equipment. So dialysis machines is a big part of it, for fear of these, what were potentially going to be winter blackouts that we had over the winter. And we had a lot of problems with that, which not just because the prospect it would happen, and luckily it never did, but also because of the fear it creates of the prospect that it might. And we had a lot of people who were concerned about that who got in touch. The second issue is, yes, if you can't heat your home sufficiently, we know it can exacerbate a lot of the health conditions that are particularly prevalent in our client group. So some of them being COPD, arthritis, angina, and a whole list of others, which can be made much, much worse by it. And the other linked component is we see in response to the cost of living crisis and increasing energy, that a lot of the sort of self-care capabilities and ability to support themselves through those sorts of issues gets reduced, partly because they have to make cost cuttings elsewhere with things like social activity, engaging with community and those sorts of things. So it's a really sort of calamitous spiral with the health side of things, and can be a real risk for people with health conditions.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, some of that work on damp and mold that's going on again at the moment, and particularly in response, to Rochdale. I mean, there's some real big issues here, which is beyond the conversation that we've had this afternoon. Any final comments from Gary, Una, Jeremy, and Craig?
No, just from my point of view, picking up the damp and mold issue, I think is an interesting one. I mean, I think in response to that original point, I think within our extra care housing and within Abbeyfield, we generally haven't seen the health issues emerge as a problem, but we have within the general needs stock. So, it was quite clear quite early on that people were turning their heating off. So we have an internal safeguarding group, and one of the things we've been looking at doing is how we can join the dots on some of the things we're seeing. So, picking up where people aren't reporting repairs, picking up reports of damp and mold, and actually doing some further investigation behind that, and looking at the general health and well-being and the circumstances of those individuals to be able to support them further. So it's that's probably been more of a challenge, significantly more of a challenge on our general needs stock than perhaps it has on our supported housing.
Una, yeah, please do come in.
Yeah, link to that is that we've, I think, all as landlords and actually as a medical profession, sort of taken damp and mold for granted and not really thought of it as it's just something you can't do anything about. So one of the things that we've done is engage with our health partners through the integrated care system, and also with our local authorities. So now we've got it as a key action within Bristol's One City Plan, which is a whole city plan for the whole, not just the city council, but all the agencies that work in the city. And dealing with damp and mold issues is now part of that city plan for the next 30 years. And linked to that is how it links into the new ICS strategy for the whole area as well. So elevating it beyond just a landlord or a residence issue to actually how do all the health partners also engage in that as well.
Well, that's really interesting. And of course, this will be impacting not just social housing, but many people in the private rented sector as well, let alone owner occupiers.
Yeah.
Look, final words to Jeremy and Craig, either order. Craig, you got your hand up. Go first.
Yes, damp and mold. There's an awful lot of people out there trying to sell solutions for damp and mold paints and things like that. Yeah, the only thing that can fix mold is ventilation. There is no other solution for it. And at that point, there are now things coming onto the market which are very, very simple pressure-based ventilation systems. So it's not yet heat recovery, but it will get rid of mold. So there's a lot of snake oil out there trying to sell solutions which will never solve the problem. And of course, all of this has been brought into horrible and sharp focus as a result of the death of that young boy. So the only thing I would say is ventilate right. That's the only way to do it. And then over time, work with consultants who kind of understand building physics and vapor pressure in buildings. It's not rocket science, but we routinely adopt painting solutions to get rid of mold, and it will never succeed.
And Jeremy, before I conclude, final thoughts?
You're on mute.
There we go. If there's anyone out there who wants to have a chat with me, then feel please free to get in touch.
Oh, no, definitely. And thanks, Jeremy. And we look forward to sharing the recording and the presentations given today in the next 24 hours or so. I know Sally behind the scenes has done a sterling job in recording today, and we'll prepare that along with your feedback. So just to remind you that once this session closes, we finish quite abruptly. There will be, for those of you who are on as participants, there'll be a very short questionnaire. We'd be ever so grateful if you can complete that. On behalf of the HousingLIN, can I thank all our speakers this afternoon for giving up their time to join us for another fantastic, successful happy hour. The chat box is going mad with congratulations to you all. So well done to you. Can I thank Sally and the team behind the scenes for making this run so smoothly. I look forward to meeting Craig and Guy in person tomorrow to find a little bit more about TAM. So see you there. But if you found this interesting, you may be interested to know that our next happy hour is on the 13th of June. We're actually being joined by Faithful and Gould and Partners, who are going to be running a session called Decarbonomics, looking at the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. And that really follows on quite neatly from the conversation we've had this afternoon, looking at some of the issues that they're facing across the country, supporting developers, operators, and the like, looking at decarbonisation from their surveying team. So please do join us that, and I'm sure we'll invite you all back to come and do another happy hour in due course. But I wish you all a pleasant evening, and thank you very much for your participation.